Hey, algebra. For our do now today, we're finding the slope between these 2 points. Hit pause while you work on your slope. All right, well, so to find slope, we're going to identify our x and y coordinates, set up our slope formula, subtracted the y coordinates on the top to get my rise, the x coordinates get subtracted down the bottom to get my run, divide or simplify that fraction to end up with the slope of -2. Nice, well, today we are looking at how to find a line of best fit, also sometimes called a trend line. Our learning target for today is you'll be able to draw a line of best fit. You can see there's another learning target here crossed off. We're not going to do the equations this time, but that is coming, and we'll just keep that in the back of our minds. Okay, we talked before about some different reasons why we study lines. All right, we look for identifying patterns, making relationships, and the third of those was to make predictions. And so trend lines are incredibly useful for all three of those, but primarily for making predictions. So this is one of the most important tools we have to look at a scatter plot, to analyze the trend or the pattern, and then to make predictions. So line of best fit. There are some guidelines for how we're going to draw a line of best fit. So we're going to start from a scatter plot. I have two sets of directions here. They both will accomplish the exact same thing. So on the right-hand side, I've got some bullet points. I'll look at those first. So first of all, look at the scatter plot. Determine what direction the dots are going. Are they going up? Are they going down? What's the general trend of the dots? Okay, follow that. Your line of best fit needs to go the same direction. You're going to try to go through the middle of the dots. So about half of the dots will be above your line. About half are going to be below. Right? Bullet point number 3. So you got half the dots above the line. Those dots that are above the line should be spread out across the whole length of the line, not like all clumped together at one end or the other. Same is true for the dots which are below the line. If all your dots are clumped together at one end, that means that your line is tilted the wrong direction and is not actually going in the right direction. And then our fourth bullet point, we do want the trend line to go through as many dots as possible, but that is the least important thing. Right? So the first 3 bullet points, those you've got to follow no matter what. If you can follow those 3 and go through some data points, that's great. But don't sacrifice the first 3 just to go through some dots. Okay, that's not the most important thing. Okay, they're on the right-hand side of the screen. We got, like I said backwards before, the right-hand side of the screen is just, we can draw a rectangle. So look at your scatter plot. You can either mentally do this, or you can actually, if you have a piece of paper, draw the smallest possible rectangle that will fit around all of the dots on your scatter plot. And then the long edge of that rectangle, that's the direction that our trend line should go. It should be parallel to the long side. And we're going to put our trend line right through the middle of that rectangle. So the 2 short edges, we should cut each of those in half, and our line should go right through there. All right, we'll see what that looks like here in just a minute. So here are some trend lines that have been drawn incorrectly. So I've got a scatter plot. We'll see the same scatter plot several times, and I've drawn a trend line on here which is wrong. So why is this one wrong? I connected some dots. This goes completely the wrong direction. All right, so I fixed the direction this time. This goes exactly the same direction that the rectangle goes. But this one obviously totally missed the dots, or I didn't even go through the middle of my rectangle. So I got the right direction, but nothing else. All right, so this one, I'm going through the rectangle, but it's still not a good trend line. Why is this one wrong? Okay, well, I did not go through the middle, right? This is totally like off to one edge of the rectangle. And it goes through one dot, but like all the rest of the dots in the scatter plot are above the line. I'm supposed to go right through the middle and cut those dots in half, so I missed. All right, lastly, this one went through a ton of dots. Look, I went through 3 dots. That's the most I've ever gone through. Still wrong. Why? Well, I still didn't go through the middle of the scatter plot. I didn't go through the middle of that rectangle. My angle might be a little bit off on the line too, but primarily I've gone in the wrong part of the rectangle. I'd want to bring this line down a little bit lower. All right, and just, some more examples here again. So this one, I did cut the dots in half. I got 3 dots below, I got 3 dots above the line. Why is this one wrong? Well, I got totally the wrong direction. So with a rectangle drawn on, that makes it really obvious. I've got my line pointing in the wrong direction. Okay, so this one is right. Why is it right? Well, because I did all the things I'm supposed to do. So I drew the rectangle around the dot, smallest possible rectangle. My line goes exactly the same direction as the long edge of the rectangle. The placement of the line is halfway across the short edge of my rectangle at both sides. So using the rectangle description, spot on. Using the bullet points, so am I going the same direction as the overall trend of these dots? Yes. Have I cut the dots in half? Yes. Maybe not exactly. I've got 3 dots above and 2 dots below, so it's not always going to be exactly perfect, but I've pretty much gone right through the middle of those dots. And I have the dots which are above the line. There's 3 of them. They're spread out across the whole length of that line, not clumped together at one end or the other. Same with the dots that are below. They're both actually kind of in the middle, but having 2 in the middle is way better than having 2 at either the left or the right end. Okay, so what about just drawing a line on our own rather than looking at mistakes or saying why something is correct? So if we're going to draw a line, first of all, I want to point out an error a lot of people try to do. They'll say, you know what, the easiest way to do this is to ignore all those directions. I'm just going to connect the first dot and the last dot, and that'll be a good trend line. And here's what happens if we do that. So if I connect the first and last data points, that does not give me a good trend line. I mean, on some occasions you might get a decent trend line, but so in this particular example is set up to illustrate why this does not work. So I've gone through a couple of dots along the way, but I did not, one, get the right direction. It's a little bit too slanted upwards. And second of all, I totally missed the middle, going through the middle of those dots, right? The dots which are not on the line, there's 4 of them that are all below. There are no dots above the line, and so that is a really easy visual observation. I can say, you know what, that line is not a good trend line. So what we do want to do is either visualize or actually draw right on here, smallest possible rectangle. That's not quite the smallest possible rectangle because I didn't draw that very well. But here's a pretty small rectangle that goes around all of the dots. And then let's see if I can get a straight line this time. Oops. All right, try it again. Straight line. Right down the center of that rectangle. Change those to arrowheads, and it's not actually supposed to be a dotted line. So I've got a couple of dots that are above the line here towards the left end. They are kind of all clumped together at the left end, so maybe I want to bring this down a little bit. So I've got 1 dot at the right end and a couple of dots there at the left end, and that kind of balances out my direction. Just as a second example here, let's look at this other one. So again, smallest possible rectangle. So make sure it's actually a rectangle, not some like oblong, trapezoid thing. So we want to keep our sides parallel. And then line right through is way too thick of a line, right through the center. Let me change that line so we can actually see what is going on here. Okay, so we're gone right through the center of that rectangle. Above the line, there's 2 dots. They're both in the middle. That's good. Below the line, I've got 1 dot below that's at the right end and 2 or 3 dots here at the left end that are below. So that's pretty close to an even balance. It's not a perfect balance, but it's pretty close. And just because of the way the dots are situated here, even if I tilt this line up, I really can't get the dots which are below the line to be evenly spread out with the same number towards the left and the right ends. And sometimes that happens, right? It just depends on where the dots in the original scatter plot are. So we have guidelines, not hard and fast rules, because there's no way that you can write this out as a set of rules and say, you always have to do exactly like this, because sometimes it's just not going to work out that way. So we do the best we can, and we've got guidelines to follow. Okay, the last thing I want to look at is once we have a trend line, we can now make predictions, right? And so we'll get to the part where we can use an equation to make predictions. In the meantime, let's say predict the y value for this graph on the left, predict the y value when x is what, 40? Well, so I can look at the graph and go across the x-axis to where 40 is, and then I can just read up where is that line at. So the line is telling me this is what the overall trend of the data is showing, what those dots are doing. So whether there is actually a dot there or not is beside the point. This is what my prediction would be at an x value of 40. It looks like I'd be at about a y coordinate of 20.